Welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to talk about what happens when we die. Pretty weighty topic, isn't it? And the reason is I have something very particular to share with you. So I'm probably going to do this in two sections. And the first is going to be talking specifically about Jesus, because Jesus actually gives us the answer to what happens when we die and to what we will actually be like into eternity. It's not going to surprise some of you for me to say this. Now, I will admit something. I hold some very contrarian views to what are normally promoted in the church. And I don't do this to be weird, and I don't do this to stand out or to just to be a contrarian. I hold to certain views because it's actually what Scripture teaches. And in case you haven't noticed, most of the church today does not teach or believe what the Scriptures actually tell us. They just don't align. And so, yes, I fully acknowledge that I hold odd views compared to what you've probably heard. But I I ask that you go and search the scriptures yourself and you tell me that it's wrong. And that's the biggest problem, guys. People don't read. They just don't read their Bibles. They rely upon somebody else to tell them the truth. I don't even want any of you to just take my word for anything. Assess what I have to say on any given topic, and then go search the scriptures yourself and see if it aligns. I would never ever willingly lie about anything. I'm not trying to press my own agenda. I just want to know what the truth is. And guys, I've changed my view on things a lot of times over the years. On things because the truth came out, because I saw new information. And I'm not trying to say I just jump around willy nilly, like changing my view all the time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm open to being able to do that if the truth leads me in that direction. So, what happens when we die? First of all, I want to tell you the typical belief that we die and we have this soul inside of us and it departs the body and it goes off and lives in heaven, or the unrighteous die and their soul, this inner spirit thing within us, goes off and lives in hell. Not the truth. That's not the truth. That is not what the Bible teaches. And it's definitely not what the Bible teaches as our main goal of what we should be looking to try to, what the main hope of the Christian faith is. That's not the goal. In fact, those are inventions. Those are Platonic Greek ideas that are very much in line with maybe the philosophy of a Plato and this idea of the immortal soul, where we have this thing that lives inside of us, and it's really you, but it's like an immaterial, woo, hologram sort of you that's just waiting to be liberated from the body, and it goes off and lives in heaven forever. It's just not scriptural, but it feels good. It's theological comfort food. It does people a lot of good sometimes internally to think, well, my loved one is off in heaven looking down on me as a disembodied spirit. But it isn't the truth. So I'm going to tell you over the next two videos what actually happens, what the main goal of the Christian faith is. So I'm going to start by talking about Jesus. Do you realize that Jesus is the only person in all of human history to have been raised back from the dead with a resurrection body? So there have been other people who were raised from the dead throughout Scripture. That was not an anomaly. It was somewhat rare, but it happened in the Old Testament. It happened throughout the New Testament. Jesus obviously raised Lazarus from the dead. Elijah and Elisha in the Old Testament raised people from the dead. The apostles raised people from the dead. What's unique about Jesus' resurrection is that he's the only one who came back with a transformed body in the likeness of the body we will one day have. Do you realize that? Let's me stop right there. because that is something I've never, literally never heard a pastor speak about on the pulpit. I've never heard it taught anywhere but in seminary where I was. Like that's where I largely went over this, kind of because I had a great professor, actually numerous. But you're not going to hear that. How many of you, honestly, have ever heard that Jesus even came back from the dead with a resurrection body? I remember sitting in a meeting one time at a place I used to work years ago, full of Christian educators. They've been in the church their whole lives. And I'm not making fun of anybody. Please don't hear me saying I'm making fun of anybody for not knowing this. It's not taught. That's why I'm talking about it. And we were going over what we'd learned that week or what the students were learning and what they were excited about. And I said, yeah, we're going over the resurrection and that Jesus came back with a transformed body and how he appeared to people. And everybody just stopped collectively and looked at me like I had grown a horn out of my head or a third eye or something weird. Like, what what's this guy talking about? And it dawned on me in that moment that nobody in that room realized that Jesus came back with a transformed body. So let me show you a few examples to prove this, okay? Because I know it's bizarre for people to think about. And by the way, he still has this resurrection body. He didn't get rid of it. He still has it. He set the pattern for us of what we can expect. He didn't die and go off to heaven or hell as a disembodied soul. He came back with a resurrection body, a real body, but was different, a bit different than what he had. One example, right after the resurrection, Mary Magdalene, and I'll put the scripture passages up here, though I'm not going to go through line by line because I go read them for yourself, but it gets long. So I'm going to summarize them. He talks to Mary Magdalene after the resurrection. Everybody thinks he's dead. The whole show is over, right? They didn't listen to him saying he's going to be raised. And so Mary Magdalene goes and she's hanging around the tomb. And it's early on the first day of the week. And she's gloomy and she's upset because she thinks he's dead and he's gone. And she sees this person that's wandering around the garden. And it says literally, she thought he was the gardener. The gardener. And she asks this gardener, basically, hey, what have they done with my Lord? What have they done with him? She does not recognize who this man is. He's human looking. He doesn't look like a cyborg or some kind of creature, but she has no idea who this is. She thinks he's the gardener. And Jesus looks at her and he goes, Mary. And in that moment, she cried out, Rabbi. I think that's what she said. Rabbi, Lord, one of those two things. And what this revealed to us is Mary Magdalene, who knew Jesus as well as anybody did, just about, was literally following him around, doing ministry with him, watching him perform all these miracles, knew him extremely well. Like I'm telling you, really, really well. Not Dan Brown, Holy Grail, well, because that's a farce. But she knew him extremely well. She did not recognize who he was until he goes, Mary, just like he always had, all those probably many, many times. And it clicked, and she goes, it's you. It's the Lord. It's Jesus. She knew him by the way he addressed her and the way he said her name because it was familiar, but she didn't recognize who he was physically. You might think, oh, well, that's, okay, that something was going on there. All right. There's another example. It's called the road to Emmaus. It's in the Gospel of Luke. And basically, Jesus, after the resurrection, people are still doubting. They're like, is he dead? He's gone. What happened? He meets these two disciples on the road to Emmaus. So from Jerusalem to Emmaus, it's about 7 miles. It's quite a walk. Jesus meets them, and he basically is like, what are you guys talking about? What do you here amongst yourselves?" And they say, are you the only one who doesn't know what happened? They crucified Jesus and all of this, and we had hoped that he might be the Messiah. We hoped he might be the one we were expecting. They hoped. So they're standing there talking to Jesus, walking this 7 miles, and they're like, he's gone. We hoped he was something that he's not. Think about that. But it says Jesus basically he gets frustrated because they're slow to believe. And it says that he begins to recount to them the Old Testament and what it was saying about the Messiah who was to come. He told them the whole narrative. He walked them through it. And they're walking side by side 7 miles, okay? They get to the end of that 7 miles, and it's getting towards dark, and they invite Jesus, whom they don't know who he is still. They invite this man to stay with them and have supper. So he does. And they go in, and it says he blesses the bread, he breaks it, and he starts to pray, and then he distributes it. And then in that moment, it says their eyes were opened, and they knew who it was. What I find curious is they walked 7 miles and listened to this man talk and recount the story of the Messiah and what he was going to do. And they go all that distance, and then they sit down to eat with him, and they still don't know who it is. Only when he blesses the meal, breaks the bread, just like he had done so many times in miracles and in the Last Supper, and then it's like it clicks. Oh my gosh, this was Jesus. This was Jesus the whole time. What does that tell you? Something about Jesus' appearance was not the same. He was a man. He was still kind of Jesus like, but he didn't look like the same guy that went into the tomb. One last example, and there's other ones that can be mentioned. At the end of the Gospel of John, it's recorded that the apostles are out there on the sea fishing, like they did so many times. In some sense, they were lost and wandering, and they went back to their old jobs. They too basically thought the show was over. And Jesus appeared numerous other times and did some strange things. He appeared through bolted doors, barricaded, bolted doors out of nowhere to them. Anyway, he appeared out on the sea and walked by them one time, but they're out there on the ocean, on the sea, and they see this guy from a distance. He's on the seashore. I think it's about 100 yards away. Close enough, you can see who it is. If you knew who the person was, you could tell it was them from 100 yards away. I've done experiments with this. So this guy is standing on the sea, and they're out there throwing their nets over and over, over and over, over and over, and they're not catching anything. Dry as a bone. So this guy on the sea basically says, are you doing any good? Cast your nets out one more time. Throw them out one more time. And the guys are thinking, we just done this for the last how many hours and hours? Nothing. And now this guy wants us to throw it over again. Yeah, all right. They cast the net over one more time, and they pull up so many fish that the net is breaking. And John records it's exactly 153 large fish. The word for large fish. This was the haul of all time. And in that moment, they realized who it was. So they come back to the beach. They all sit down. They prepare fish, and they sit there and eat it together. And this miracle had occurred. Once again, these fish are multiplied. Once again, Jesus has proven who he was. But the most curious thing of all to me is what John records. They're all sitting around having fish, and they're astonished. And this is what it says. Even at this point, No one dared to ask him who he was, for they knew it was the Lord. Now I ask you something. Think about anybody you know at all. If you were sitting there eating with them, why would it even enter your mind to ask them who they are? Why would John even record, no one dared to ask him who he was, unless there was still some kind of weird doubt about it? After the miracle of the fish, after sitting there talking with him, eating, dining, they're still not really totally sure it is the Lord. Obviously, it's Him because look what happened. But why do you suppose all this is true? It's true because, like I said, the man who went into the tomb after being crucified and rose on the third day, the one who came out of that tomb, did not look the same as the one who went in. And this tells us something very unique about the nature of what happens when we die and what we will be like. Jesus sets the pattern for what we are going to be like. And he didn't rise from the dead and go live in some other place as an ethereal woo spirit. No, no, no. He came back with a resurrection body, and that body was new and improved. It was a transformed body. It was of the substance of the angelic beings. It was of the substance of the heavenly realm. And yes, the heavenly realm is a tangible existence. It's not a bunch of spooky specter hologram things that you can put your hands through sitting atop a bunch of clouds. It's a real, tangible, somehow kind of physical world. And you have to have that makeup to be in that world. Jesus remains to this day the only person who's ever been raised with a resurrection body. And that actually, as we'll see on the next time, that actually paints the picture of what we are going to look like too. So, just in this moment, Jesus shows us something important. He shows us what afterlife looks like. It looks like this: flesh, physicality. Jesus eats, but he doesn't look the same. And he also doesn't have the same limitations. He goes in and out of doors, but he's physical. He appears and disappears in other places, but he's physical somehow. So you hear all these songs about dying and going to heaven and going off to heaven, and we just can't wait to die and get to heaven. Guys, that's not even actually what the pattern is. That's not what the hope is. New heaven, new earth, new bodies, that is actually the hope of the afterlife. Not to die and go live as some disembodied spirit for the rest of eternity. That is pagan. That is Platonic. That is not scriptural. It's not in the Bible. It's something way better. This body we have, as we'll see next time, it gets a massive makeover. It gets a transformation. And we live in eternity as a tangible being with a body that is new and improved and doesn't decay and is all these wonderful things, just as Jesus' resurrection body is. So I hope you guys found this interesting. Drop comments below. I'll talk next time for a little bit about the nature of what it's really going to look like, because Paul explains this as well for us. So if you guys found this interesting, go check me. Go double check. See if I'm telling you anything that's not true. But I guarantee what is not true is what you hear 99% of the time by the world and most churches, sadly. Because the whole focus on everything is dying and going to heaven, being liberated from this body so your soul can live forever. Not the truth. All right, guys. Appreciate it. Drop comments below. Come at you with another one soon. Oh, yeah. As one more mention, my book just came out, Order of the Eye. I'm not that person who likes to just advertise for myself, but just be aware I think it's going to be a really powerful book if you take a look at it. Order of the Eye, available on Amazon right now. All right, guys, appreciate it. Talk about you with another one soon. Until then, God bless.